Oh, yeah. Welcome to Up the Rabbit Hole with me, Up Rabbit. We're not going down the rabbit hole, we're going up the rabbit hole. We're looking up and we're positive about it. For those of you that listened to my first podcast, thank you. Few rough edges, but we'll get there. I tried to add a cover to my podcast of Up Rabbit, and the app that I used distorted the image, so it looked a little bit freaky. And I'm not sure if I'll be using it going forward, but yeah, it's a learning experience. So last week I promised to look at Matthew Walker's Sleep book, but I've decided to delay that when I'm more prepped. What I've been reading at the moment, and I don't want to just say reading. I've been interested in Stoicism for the last 3 or 4 years. I guess it's become popular, more popular. I've heard of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. I'm pretty sure it's in Silence of the Lambs in the book, or in one of the movies they mention it. And I just kept thinking there's no modern take on Stoicism, and that's also why on my channel you'll see I'm doing the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, a little bit of commentary, and then sort of a bit of an updating so that we can understand what's going on, But we don't need the words like bequeatheth and all the Latin. Let's bring it to a modern audience that can understand. But today's focus is going to be, well, let me jump before I say the focus. So somewhere I read that Stephen R. Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is very close to some of the ideas of Stoicism. And what he says is that in the past we used to focus on the character ethic. Character was important, and for some reason we've veered off that path, and now the interest is personality. Everything's about personality, what you can get away with, how you can manipulate people. So what I want to do is I'm obviously going through the book, and the book has 7 habits, and the whole concept of the book is that in your life you fall in one of 3 places. So either you're in a dependent stage where you are dependent for whatever reasons, emotionally, financially, and one of your goals is to become independent or to reach independence, which we all know. But one of the ideas is that this stage of independence, you could be quite selfish. You could be, yes, you can exist on your own, but the true win that Covey's going for is to reach interdependence. So what I'd like to do today is just of the 7 habits, they're broken into 3 and 3, and then the final habit, which is sharpen the saw. So obviously, spoiler alert, but once you've mastered the first 3 habits, you need to sharpen the saw. And the first habit in the private victory. So between dependence and independence, Covey is saying that you need some sort of private victory, okay, and basic control of yourself, your reactions, your stimulus, your emotions. Not feeling like a victim. He talks a lot about Viktor Frankl's ideas and logotherapy. But so the chapter we're looking at today is be proactive. Habit 1, be proactive. And so what I thought is I'm just going to go through some of the points I liked, some of the parts I highlighted, discuss them, and let's see if we can work through the book today. Not today. We're not going to do the whole book. We're just going to do the chapter. And also, what I'm trying to see is where some Stoic ideas have jumped into the book. Where not just Stoic ideas, but where Covey's sort of drawing some of his ideas from. So I mean, you'll see that in this chapter, there's a part that speaks of your circle of influence and your circle of control, and that is pretty much a Stoic idea of controlling what's within your power to control. It's just what's within your circle you control, what's outside your circle you don't. And Covey later on in the second habit, he also goes into these ideas of your center, where your values come from. And for instance, he'll say that worrying about possessions and your reputation is not important, and that you read in a lot of Stoic literature as well. So it's not, obviously he didn't just look at Stoicism. I think a big credit is Benjamin Franklin. And I actually did see an old Benjamin Franklin book at one of my secondhand bookstores, and I'll definitely pick that up. And maybe in the future we can look at that. But yeah, let's have a look at this. So be proactive. He actually starts the book with a quote. It says, "I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by conscious endeavor." By Henry David Thoreau. I don't know who Henry David Thoreau is. I guess maybe we're going to look that up. But so basically, what's being said here is that your conscious endeavor can pick you up out of your current circumstances. Easier said than done, but it seems to be a common idea. So if we look at some of the ideas in this book, the idea is that we can be proactive in this chapter because we are self-aware. So Covey goes into this idea is that because we are self-aware, we're not just animals. If we're angry, we don't have to hit someone. If we're upset, we don't have to stay upset. If we're annoyed, we can do something about it. So we are not our feelings. We are not our moods, says Covey. We are not even our thoughts. So yeah, it bears a bit of thought. Okay, all right. So what's he saying? He's saying we have some control of our emotions, but a lot of us behave like we don't. So let's see where the author goes with that. Covey says, in fact, until we take how we see ourselves and how we see others into account, we will be unable to understand how others see and feel about themselves and their world. Unaware, we will project our intentions on their behavior and call ourselves objective. So also, be careful of projection. Be careful of seeing yourself in other people, or letting their behaviors annoy you because of something you feel or haven't dealt with. Then he goes on to talk about the social mirror. All right, he says, if the only vision we have of ourselves comes from the social mirror, from the current social paradigm, and from the opinions, perceptions, and paradigms of the people around us, our view of ourselves is like the reflection in a crazy mirror. So, if you have no idea of who you are and what you believe in, everyone controls you. Right? If you can't control your anger, you can go to a bar or a restaurant and the waiter can mess some coffee on your table, or someone can look at you funny, and because you don't have, I don't want to say you're not socialized properly, but because you don't have an idea of how not to be controlled or how to control your emotions, and that doesn't mean to be a walkover. These are two separate things. The point is, first there needs to be thought, right? Someone does something, I need to think about how I want to react, and a lot of us don't. Because we're tired, because we're upset, we just blast. So he also says, Covey, these visions are disjointed, the visions that we're getting from other people, and out of proportion. They are often more projections than reflections, projecting the concerns and character weaknesses of the people giving the input to us, rather than accurately reflecting what we are. So yeah, who are you? I mean, yeah, easy, all age-old question. He then goes on to talk about three different determinisms. Ideas about what influences us. So is it our grandparents? Is it psychic determinism? Is it our parents? Is it environmental determinism? Says it's your boss and your environment that's forcing you to behave the way you are. And then an idea pops in. So the idea is this: there's stimulus and there's response, right? Something happens to me, I respond. But the author looks at these ideas, and I don't think it's just him, because he mentions Viktor Frankl, and that is a very, okay, I don't want to say it's a sad story. It's any story of suffering is for me anyway highly disturbing, and sticks with me for a long time. And obviously Viktor Frankl was in concentration camps, and he came up with some strategies which is very similar in my opinion to what Epictetus did, because Epictetus was a slave and his owner broke his arm. I mean, you're going to have a lot of resentment and anger towards someone who treats you that way, and a lot of us carry that anger and resentment towards our parents. So what Frankl did is he realized that the people around him could take away his liberty. He couldn't move, he couldn't do what he wanted, but they couldn't take away his freedom and how it was going to affect him. He could decide, says Covey, within himself how all of this was going to affect him. And this is straight out the book from Stephen R. Covey. Until he had more freedom than his naughty captors, they had more liberty, more options to choose from their environment, but he had more freedom, more internal power to exercise his options. So yeah, I don't think any of us would want to be there, but let's learn from people who have suffered and how they dealt with it. So, between stimulus and response, says the author, man has the freedom to choose. He then goes on to define proactivity, right? So, I mean, even Peterson has the book Maps of Meaning. I haven't read Maps of Meaning. I've read 12 Rules for Life and a few of the other books, but obviously this idea of a map, a mental map, seems important to how we behave. And so the author calls it a self map. And it sounds like Frankl came up with the idea of proactivity according to the book. I haven't looked that up, but maybe I will. And so what does it mean? So what does it mean to be proactive, right? How does this help us? So I guess what the author's saying is that between stimulus and response, says Stephen Covey, you have the freedom to choose, right? You have self-awareness, you have imagination, you have a conscience, and you have independent will. And I think this is also why alcohol is such a dangerous substance, or drugs, because, depending on what type, but you remove some of these abilities, depending on if you overdo, especially with alcohol. Alcohol, you just get upset and you blast, right? Without thinking about it. So he goes on to look at it and look at defining the ideas like responsibility, the ability to respond appropriately, right? It seems that the idea of being proactive is that you are responsible for your own life. So something happens to me, in that moment, I am responsible about how I react. And yes, terrible things happen to other people, and I don't know if these type of ideas are applicable to all the experiences of life, but I think for the majority of us, it seems like a good idea. So, are you reactive, or are you proactive? Do you react to what happens to you, or are you proactive and think about it? So the author goes on to say, reactive people are often affected by their physical environment. If the weather is good, they feel good. If it isn't, if it affects their attitude and their performance, proactive people can't carry on their own weather they can't carry their own weather with them. Whether it rains or shines makes no difference. So reactive people let their moods and their feelings and their days be affected by what's going on around them. They don't have, later on we're going to get into the principles in the book, but this is where all this starts. If you have principles, you will wake up. If you've made a promise to yourself, you'll keep it. They're affected by external stimuli. So, and I just want to say, I've read this chapter, and I'm reading this book. I've tried to read it throughout my life, and I think I found it at the right time. There's a saying that when the student is ready, the master will appear. And like I said, I've tried to read this book 4 times in my life, and this is the first time that I'm truly connecting with it. So I would say, if you read it and you don't connect, leave it for 5 years. Come back in 10 years. Come back. There's no rush in life to be perfect. Then obviously what the author says is being proactive is not being obnoxious, but it's being responsible, right? It's taking responsible for my reaction to things happening to me. My boss is treating me badly. Can I defend myself? Can I look at it from his perspective? Can I see if he's got a point? My partner is upset with me. Should I just get upset with her? Should I try and discuss it? Should I truly listen? So these are some of the proactive ideas that he gets into. So the author says, do you want to be acted upon, or do you want to act? So he says, each puts the responsibility on you to act. If you wait to be acted on, you will be acted upon. And growth and opportunity and consequences attend either the road. So if you just sit there and you just let life... Sorry guys, I'm drinking my coffee. I don't know how to avoid it, but it is what it is. Maybe go make yourself a nice hot cuppa. And a growth of opportunity. So you just sit there and life happens to me, and woe be me, and everything I do is terrible, and some people have things working against them. So I don't like to dismiss that someone's suffering and that. But the idea is that I live in South Africa, and when I was a kid, there used to be one guy walking around emptying out dustbins. You how it worked is you used to put your black bags outside, and they'd be collected by the refuse. And then now we've got this bin system, and it used to be, like I said, there would be one guy or 2 guys coming past, and now it's almost industrial. There's like 40 people who are, I don't know what the correct terminology is, unemployed, and women, men, different ethnicities, all digging through your rubbish to just get something that they can recycle, be it plastic or that. And on one hand, people are annoyed. There's people outside my home. I don't feel safe. But on the other hand, they're being proactive. They had to wake up at 4 a.m. on a cold winter day so that they could dig through your rubbish. And sort it, and then I don't know if you've ever played Dark Souls 3, but in the beginning there's these guys with like eggshells on their back, and these unemployed people, they drag these massive sort of like a square bag, but it's like a cube, like a massive cube, like a Minecraft cube, and they fill this full of rubbish swords, and they drag these behind them, and it's not easy. They build little almost like a cart with wheels, and they need to drag these things to the scrapyards, which are sometimes miles away. And if you go to Joburg, they pull these things uphill, and then drivers get annoyed because, oh, these guys are in front of me. Woe be me in my 700,000, 1 million rand car, 400,000 rand car, and you can't even just calm down for 2 seconds. This guy's trying to make a living. But anyway, getting a little distracted. The point is, if they can be proactive, so can you. And then I grew up in a very small suburb, and I tried to be proactive, but I gave into my emotions as a young adult and as a teenager, and frustration would easily lead me to give up. So yeah, let's see it. There are some ideas here, and also the way you talk to yourself. So the author goes into the way we talk. So a lot of people say I have to do it, or it makes me so mad, or I can't control my emotions. So he gives a little example. So reactive language and proactive language. So let's have a look at it. Obviously, this is written by the author. There's nothing I can do. Reactive language. There's absolutely nothing I can do. Proactive language. Let's look at the alternatives. Right? There's nothing I can do. I can't go. Whatever it is you want. I cannot do a secondary job. There's nothing I can do. I have a job. I'm tired. What are the alternatives? Can I get more? Can I work 3 days a week? Can I talk to my boss? Can I rest on a Friday? Can I maybe stop drinking caffeine so that I sleep properly? Can I exercise? Can I? So I'm just going to go through them. Reactive language, that's just the way I am. So reactive, it's just the way I am. I'm not going to change. Proactive language, I can choose a different path. I have it within me to choose a different path. Reactive language, he makes me so mad. Proactive language, I can control my own feelings. And that, he makes me so mad, or I can control my own feelings, is also almost like a stoic idea, that you don't have to react to what people do. You make yourself upset. And I know people are like, this sounds, even sometimes I feel that the Stoics are full of it. Let's put it that way in a neat way. You can just control your emotions. Just control your emotions. And it's not always so easy. I mean, I don't know if you've ever gone and gymmed and your heart squats it heavy and then your heart's pumping, or I do jiu-jitsu. You get into a roll and the ego kicks in. It's not so easy just to calm down. There's a lot of biology to us, right? A lot of aggression. So this takes work. I guess the point is it's not easy. It's not easy to be proactive. So the author gets into this point. So he calls it the circle of concern and the circle of influence, and then he gives some ideas on that. And I think, like I said, that goes back to the Stoic ideas of control what was in your control and what is not, let go. So the author says there are things that concern us, and that's the circle of concern. And outside of the circle of concern, there's no concern. So what concerns us? What should concern us? Obviously, your health, your money, your family, your friends, the things you enjoy, your society, your religion. This concerns us. But there's some things that maybe shouldn't concern us. Maybe I shouldn't be worried about the petrol price. Maybe petrol's going to go up. It's going to go down. Is it going to change my life? Probably not. I can probably use a bicycle, but I choose not to. So let's have a look. Basically, the ideas here within this proactive chapter in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is your circle of concern and your circle of influence work on each other. If you're too obsessed with your circle of influence, the things you can control, then the author says proactive people focus their efforts on the circle of influence. Okay? Reactive people focus on the circle of concern. And I think I might be misinterpreted this, but I think the idea that the author's getting to is that you want to sort of get to a point where your circle of influence is on the outside, is the main circle, and the circle of concern is smaller. You can't not be concerned about the war in Russia or the tariff changes last year, but he breaks it down into some ideas of handling this. So direct, indirect, and no control. So the author says, the problems we face fall into one of 3 areas: direct control, problems involving our own behavior; indirect control, problems involving other people's behavior; or no control, problems we can do nothing about, such as our past or situational realities. Now, I find it interesting because earlier the author's saying to be proactive is to not have negative language. but there are things to which we shouldn't be proactive, and those are things over which we have no control. So our past, you can't be proactive about your past. I mean, unless you Marty McFly, climb in the DeLorean and sort it out. And then even if you watch that movie, that probably won't work either. And then situational reality is beyond your control. So maybe global warming is beyond your control, or maybe you feel that is within your control. That's up to you. So there's a lot of mind work that goes into figuring out what's proactive or not. And then the author goes on to say, direct control problems are solved by working on our habits. They're obviously within our circle of influence. These are the private victories in habits 1, 2, and 3. And then indirect problems are solved by changing our methods of influence, and these are public victories. And throughout the book, I'm only on habit 2. I imagine that the author, as I said, the author's going to get into that. So let's just look at some of the parts I highlighted. It's the nature of reactive people to absolve themselves of responsibility. It's so much safer to say, I am not responsible. If I say I am responsible, I might have to say I am irresponsible. It would be very hard for me to say that I have the power to choose, says the author. My response and the response I've chosen has resulted in my involvement in a negative, collusive environment. Especially for years, I've absolved myself of responsibility for results in the name of someone else's weaknesses. Oh, that one stings me a little bit. Blaming your parents, blaming your home, blaming instead of just getting up, tying your shoes and hacking away. And maybe one day I'll get into my life, but not yet. So the author carries on and he defines a way to define, what you should focus on. He calls it the haves and the bees. So he says, one way to determine which circle our concern is in is to distinguish between the haves and the bees. The circle of concern is filled with the haves, which maybe we shouldn't focus on. The author says, I'll be happy when I have paid my house off. If only I had a boss who wasn't such a dictator. If only I had. So listen to your language. Haves had. If only I have R1 million, I would be happy. If only I have the perfect sleep. If only. Okay. The B is where you should focus. Be present. I can be more patient. I can be more wise. I can be more loving. I can be more in the moment. I can be more attendant to my spouse's needs, my own needs, my children's needs. So the haves and the bees. Very useful. And let's see what else I've highlighted here. If I really want to improve my situation, I can work on the one thing over which I have control, myself. I can stop trying to shape up my wife and work on my own weaknesses, says Stephen R. Covey. And let's look at some other highlights. Sometimes the most proactive thing we can do is be happy. Just generally smile. Happiness, like unhappiness, is a proactive choice. I find that interesting. So I don't know if it's true. Like, can you just decide to be happy? And then I'm not talking about people who have, biological issues that can only be resolved with taking depression medication or that's not what we're saying. But can you just say, I'm going to be happy? And I feel I'm that type of person. I generally smile at everyone. I wake up in the morning and there's a lot of positivity in me. And I'm always excited by knowledge and learning new things. So, and here comes this idea of the stick. And I've heard this before, but the author says the other end of the stick. And basically what he's saying is when you pick up the one side of the stick, pick up the other side of the stick. And there could be bubblegum on the end of the stick. There could be doggy poo. There could be a lot of things that you don't want to touch on the other side of that stick. So bear that in mind, because when you decide to act with principles or with values, you pick up both sides of the stick. If you make a value to yourself that you won't let anyone swear at you, it means that while you're sitting in front of your customer and they swear, you need to say, excuse me, sir, I don't want you to swear, knowing that it could cost you all that business. So let's look at some of the highlights. The author says that while we are free to choose our actions, we are not free to choose the consequences of those actions. Consequences are governed by natural law. And let's break away from the book a bit, and I just want to say that I agree with this 100%. I've recently gone through a situation like this where I decided where I've just decided to say my truth, mainly because of Jordan Peterson, tell the truth. And if you read the Power book, which maybe one day we'll go through, I don't know if I agree with the Power book so much, or if you're naive not to understand that's how things work in certain segments of the world, maybe in government or in business. But telling the truth is difficult. It's difficult to tell the truth to yourself, and telling the truth to and I'm not saying in an ugly way, just trying to be honest and say it in the nicest possible way. It will lead to some shakeups within your within your family, within your circle, within yourself. And yeah, yeah, I just like this idea that we are free to choose our actions, but not the consequences. So be careful, be careful about self improvement, because mm, you can shake things up and upset your family and upset your relationships, and theoretically it's for the better, but yeah, we'll get. Yeah, I'm not going to get into it now, but we can just the examples. Yeah, another example I highlighted is the author says we can decide to be dishonest in our business dealings. While the social consequences of that decision may vary depending on whether or not we are found out, the natural consequences to our basic character are a fixed result. So yeah, be dishonest, lie. You won't. Maybe you don't get caught. Maybe you get away with it. But in the end, you know the truth about the way you're behaving, and you create the society you want to live in, or not, depending on your belief. Our behavior, says the author, is governed by principles. Living in harmony with them brings positive consequences. When we pick up one end of the stick, we pick up the other. For those filled with regret, says the author, perhaps the most needful exercise of proactivity is to realize that past mistakes are also out there in the circle of concern. So they're in the circle of concern, not influence. We can't recall them, we can't undo them. We can't control the consequences that came as a result. So, and then the author goes on to speak about his son and football, and the fact that you need to acknowledge mistakes. And if you don't acknowledge the mistakes, then you make a second mistake, which is covering them up, which goes back to telling the truth. So, next chapter, making and keeping commitments. Says the author, at the very heart of our circle of influence is our ability to make and keep commitments and promises. To ourselves, to other people, to our past, to our future. Where it's interesting. It reminds me of Jamie in Game of Thrones when he talks about making promises to the lords, and how you make different ones and then they overlap each other. I can't think of the word now, but so he says we can make a promise and keep it, or we can set a goal and achieve it if we're proactive. Knowledge, skill, and desire all within our control, says Stephen R. Covey. I just want to say the book is by Stephen R. Covey, and it's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Powerful Lessons in Personal Change. And I'm pretty sure you can pick this up at any bookseller, or I have no affiliation, but or obviously on Amazon, or so I would suggest that if you're interested. But anyway, so and then the author gives you a bit of a 30-day test, right? He says, be a light, not a judge. Be a model, not a critic. Be part of the solution. He says, try this proactive approach in your family. And he gives you a few suggestions, so application suggestions. He says, for a full day, listen to your language, or